Welcome, everyone. It's a pleasure to have you here. My name is Akosh. I'm the host of Airtime Webinars, which is a bi-weekly series of discussions with research and product leaders about topics that they care about. Today, I'll be talking to Javier Vargas about critical user journeys. Javier is a UX director of Google with over 20 years of research experience. And I have to say, I was thinking about how to characterize him. And I think I'm just going to call you, Javier, the rock star of UX research. Yeah.
I like that.
I hope you're not offended by that.
No, because I actually played rock music in my past life, so I like that.
I know, and I have a lot of esteem and respect for musicians. Now, in case you used YouTube, Google Ads, or Google Cloud, there's a good chance that you came across some of the work that Javier did in the background, understanding your needs and building amazing products for you in the Google suite. So before we kick things off, I see a lot of activity in the chat already. People tuning in from US, Germany, France, the New Delhi. I love that. Keep it coming. I'm so proud of this international crowd, to be honest.
You should.
Javier, and it's an honor to have you here. I'm really happy. And I think before we plunge into the deep water, could you say a few words about yourself to the audience?
Yes, absolutely. Hello, everyone. Hello, world. It's an honor to be here. My name is Javier. I'm a UX director, UX research director. So I'm a psychologist by training. And quick path. I'm Swiss, so I'm based in Switzerland, and I'm born and raised here, even if my name is Spanish. And I studied psychology. Then I moved, so I focused on HCI UX, moved to be a consultant, worked for banks and insurances doing research, then went back to academia, built up a research lab there for many years, did my PhD there. And then I went 2011, I joined Google. And I pretty much spent most of my time at Google building and scaling research teams for YouTube, for ads, for cloud, for play, different setups, different focuses, but it was always around research. And yeah, that's the reason why I'm here talking with you.
Thank you. Critical user journeys is the theme today. So I guess the knowledge of critical user journeys in the audience will vary from people who find this as a completely new concept and people who have implemented it. So let's just level up the field a little bit. And I'd love to hear your definition of what critical user journeys are, and maybe more importantly, why is it so useful, and why should we think about using them when we build products?
Yeah, I'm happy to answer that. And maybe the best way to answer this is to go a little bit back in history of Google's history and how this came to be. The CUJ program at Google is actually pretty old, about a decade old. And it was created out of a situation that happened where there's an anecdote, a myth, which I don't actually know if it's true, but I think it is, which is that Larry Page a friend of Larry asked like if he could help them set up their Android phone. And so he said like, yes. And so they spent time doing that. And apparently it took them 2 hours because they had to like install Android and then create the Google account and create a YouTube channel and whatever, like just to send a text message. And so Larry got really upset. It was like, why is this so bad? And the reality was that Google is obviously already at that time was a large company, and the different teams were building their products, but they were not really connected well. Nobody had actually thought about the journey of somebody getting a phone and installing it for the first time and configuring all these things as one journey. Every team was doing a good job in their piece of that journey, but like connecting, it was awful. And so out of that, so basically, Larry went to UX and said, like, this is awful, we need to fix it. And so that CUJ effort was born. And the idea of the CUJ effort is to change the way that that a company or like teams develop products by ingesting user knowledge throughout the entire life cycle, right? If you think about many teams like UXers working in teams, there are these moments and times where we actually generate user knowledge, right? So it might be research, right? We test things or we do some foundational research and we ingest user knowledge at these moments. But the product development life cycle is much longer, much more complex than that. And if you only have user knowledge in these few places, then you're actually not developing in a user-centered way. You need user-centered data to actually think about the users all the time. And so the CUJ effort holistically is actually that. Can we create a vehicle, a program where we ingest user knowledge at all points throughout the development process? That is basically the goal. And so a CUJ stands for critical user journey, and the critical user journey consists of goals, which is like a goal that the users have, and the tasks that they need to complete or to achieve this particular goal. And critical means it's the most important ones, right? There's obviously all products have a lot, like fulfill a lot of goals, and it's not helpful if we cannot think about all those goals all the time, because then it becomes like unmanageable. It is the most important ones. So can we define and measure and report and use throughout the product lifecycle the most important things that our users want to do with our product? So we always focus on those things, no matter where we are in product development.
Yeah, amazing. Now, I listened to, and I actually watched one of your talks at a Mind the Product event, and you said something that I still remember, and you said that ideally you land with 5 to 7 CUJs that you focus on. I'd love to understand your experience. Why is it not less or more? Why is it 5 to 7? It sounded to me that there's some sort of science behind that, or at least some good and bad experiences. And let's just start with that.
Okay.
And maybe, and I also guess just one more thing. Sorry, that you have like initially a long list of CUJs. So I'd like to then turn towards understanding how you narrow it down to that 5-7.
Yes. So I wish I could say there is a science behind it, but it's more experience using it, right? When the CUJ effort was created, teams went off and started creating like CUJs, like defining which are the most important things that users do in the product, right? And what happened is that every team working on any kind of subset or sub-feature or aspect of the product wanted to see themselves reflected in those CUJs. And so it became like super long lists of journeys, and hundreds, 200. And it was completely unmanageable and unuseful. Because what happened is that instead of us defining the most important journeys, we started to move to the task level. So when you looked at those lists, they were actually not really user journeys, they were tasks, right? So if you have a journey that is like, ensure that your privacy settings in the app are set according to your wishes, right? Then you need to be honest and go like, well, that's likely not a critical user journey. It's not a goal. Like your goal is not to set those settings, right? Your goal is to say like, okay, I want to ensure that my data is safe, and like everything around that, if that even is something of the most important things, that would be the goal. And all the tasks that help you to set the data access accordingly and manage your subscriptions and stuff, all of that would be in that journey, right? That also means that we had to move to a place where we were like, well, not every team needs to see themselves immediately reflected in those CUJs, right? The CUJs are a way for the team to always think about users, and they need to be a number of CUJs that are manageable, that we can keep in our heads and we can use it, and we can measure stuff, and we can report it, and we can use it in planning, and so on, right? It cannot be a list of 200 because then nobody uses it. And so the 5 to 7 is a rule of thumb. It can be a little less, it can be a little more, but not much, because the moment it becomes too long, people stop using it, and then the entire effort is for nothing. And so to your second question, like, okay, how do you move from a long list to a short list? It actually doesn't have to be that you have to create such a long list, right? I mean, that happens sometimes. And if you have that, right, yeah, you need to do workshops and like start to think like which of these things belong together. Is there an overarching goal that users are trying to do with those subsets and so on? But if you start from scratch, you can also say, well, our goal is to end up with 5 to 7, right? And you start listing all the important things people do, things you know from research, things you know from customer support, from marketing, right? From everybody who knows about users. And then you start aggregating and you start putting together and trying to come up with a list that is holistic of the most important things, but is manageable.
Thanks, and I love the details that you shared. It reminded me a little bit. It may sound far-fetched initially, but when you describe what is a task and then realizing like sometimes you thought something is a goal, but it's actually a task. It reminded me of how Uber back in the days defined insights, right? And in an insight repository, you would say like everybody knows what an insight is, but they had like 4 components that every single insight needed to have, and that was sort of their check to make sure that it is an insight and not an observation or something on a lower level. And what I take from you is that it's very important to have this sanity check whenever you come up with a CUJ, that at the placeholder of the goal, you're really having a goal and not something from a lower level.
Correct. I like the example of the insight because that's something that happens often where you just have like, okay, this is an insight, but actually if you look at it closely, it's an observation of something else. It's actually not really at that level. Yeah, it's a good example.
Yeah. Now, what I'm intrigued about when it comes to customer user journeys, and I thought about it also in terms of my own business and airtime, and we have multiple types of customers, and we have like highly skilled researchers, we have product managers, and they have very contradicting workflows in airtime. And what I thought to myself, does it ever happen that CUJs in a company are sort of contradicting in what they yield in terms of what you need to build? And if there is any such contradiction, how do you overcome that?
Well, so the CUJs, I mean, if we're talking about goals, right, then your users might have the same goals, but then take different paths to achieve them, right? So
yes,
an expert, if we're in that field, like an expert versus somebody who's like maybe more of a casual user, right? The expert might want to still have the same goal, but they need different things to achieve that goal, and so they take paths that are longer, more complex. While the more novice users might not want to do that, might just want to go like basically the wizard type, very short path. And the beauty about the CUJ is that when you define the goals and the tasks that people use to achieve that goals, they can be very different, and there are very different paths. And when you start measuring those, and that happens also very often at Google, when we start measuring a CUJ, we actually often don't know which paths people take to achieve the goal, right? So we know, okay, there is a start, there is a goal, and there is an end. Here we know they have achieved the goal. And then we start looking at which are those paths that they take. And very often you're surprised yourself, or you're like, oh, that's interesting. That's a path too. And so I would expect the experts to have more complex paths, and you need to support them because it's a use case, right? And the more novice users to just have more simple paths, and many products have to support both, right? I mean, that's the challenge of developing good products, is that you cater for those or for multiple audiences.
Okay. I didn't mean to piggyback, by the way, on our webinar to solve a conundrum for my own business. I wanted to use it as an example, because I think when it comes to, you take the CUJs down to what am I building, and I have certain number of people in my team. It often comes down to the question, what do I have time for, and what do I push first? Do I make my do I cater more for the experts, or for the fast for the fast users? Yeah. But what I'm also very interested in, and let's move back to wheels of time. 10 years ago, Google got started with CUJs. You must have had something beforehand, or yeah. I was just wondering what obviously it was already a very successful company, but how do you go about when you say, okay, CUJs is something for my company, I'd like to implement them, but I haven't done it yet. How do I get started? It seems a bit overwhelming just on the first hearing.
So if you want to start developing CUJs, like the first thing is obviously to understand the framework, understand what it is, and then understand that this is an effort that only will be successful if everybody is part of it, right? It cannot be a UX thing. That was the case in the beginning at Google. It was a UX thing, and PM and Eng, like for a long period of time, didn't care. Like it was just UX doing that stuff, and then nothing happened with it. And it only changed when pretty much like Larry said, like, no, like this is something for everyone. So because if you want to change the way products are developed, you can only change that if everybody that develops the product is actually part of that change. They need to feel ownership over it, they need to feel involved, and they need to understand what it is. So creating basically a task force of at least PM and UX, but could be also other disciplines. I often mention like customer support, CX org, if there's something like that is important. It could be marketing, that like they know a lot about users too, right? Basically come together and say, okay, we need to define the most important things users are doing with our product, right? Why don't we pull together all the data we have? And then it's like a sprint, right? So you have research sharing all the insights they have about users, right? You have PMs sharing everything about the strategy of the product and the market, right? And you have marketing sharing like what they know about the market and so on. And so you get all these insights together, right? And you start brainstorming in a workshop, multi-day, where you start putting together like different things that are important to users. You realize, oh, there's some repetition. You gather maybe some stuff is less important, right? Maybe you even go look at your logs and go like, well, that's actually not that critical, so you remove it. So it is a process where you go through defining those CUJs to eventually try to come up with 5 to 7, and if you have too many, you need to basically merge them and figure out like which ones are dropped. And all of that needs to happen together because of what I mentioned. People need to feel ownership and they need to see themselves and the most important things reflected in that list, right? If you end up with a list where then suddenly PM comes and goes like, what the hell, these are not the most important things, then you lost. And defining CUJs, that's not the really tricky part, right? Because that's, okay, needs a couple days, you put that in a document, then fine. What comes after is more complicated because the CUJ framework now is about measuring those CUJs, right? Understanding on the attitudinal scale how users are satisfied with that particular CUJ, and on the behavioral scale, like what are they doing? Are they achieving their goals, right? And measuring that with for instance, surveys and with logs, right? That takes much more time than actually defining the CUJs.
Amazing. What are the typical, now that we're talking about, we're going to jump into measuring, by the way, in a second. Once you have your CUJs, are they, how do they flow into the roadmap? What's the what's the process for that?
So the most important part is like once you have the CUJs and you can measure them, and that might not be, by the way, might not be all the CUJs in the beginning. Maybe you define 7, but you can measure 2 or 3, right? But once you have that, you need to start using them throughout the life cycle, right? So it can start at the beginning where you're prioritizing, where you're figuring out what should we work on, right? And so you have those CUJs and you know how they're doing. You know if users are happy with the CUJs, and you know if they're achieving their goals, right? So now we have issues with CUJ 5, right? You have 100 feature ideas that PM wants to work on, and you need to figure out which one, right? So now you can map to those features the CUJs. Say, okay, this feature will impact CUJ 1 and 3, right? And so on. So now you can say, should we look at the features that impact the CUJ 5, which we know are not doing well, right? And should we, so if these ideas solve any of the issues users have, right? And so that's a first ingestion point where you can use user data, user insights to prioritize what you work on. Then you move to planning, right? You plan and you, like, PMs write their PRDs, right? So now in the PRDs, you need to have a section about CUJs. You need to say, which CUJ will this idea, this effort impact, and how? Like, what are success metrics? How will CUJ metrics change based on that feature? Right? And then you move on to exploring with design, right? Okay, how can we solve this particular problem? So now, instead of just thinking about the particular problem, you embed that in the CUJ, right? So when you prototype, you're not just prototyping that small piece, but you're actually prototyping the entire CUJ that covers the journey that users have, the entire goal, right? So now you can understand how is that CUJ changing based on this thing that we're now changing of the entire journey. And you use that for testing when you do research, right? You say, like, okay, we need to actually test those journeys. We just don't need to test only the task. We will test the entire journey, because that's what users are here for. They're trying to achieve a goal. They're not trying to solve a small task that is attached to your feature that you're working on. And then when you can also use it afterwards when you move towards launching. You can say, okay, we're not launch ready before the CUJ metrics are not at least at the place where they were before, right? So we need to understand how the change impacts the CUJs, observe that, maybe A/B testing, and we look at those metrics. Are we ready to launch? Success metrics, right? If we launched, are we successful? Can we show that with the CUJ data? Up to afterwards, like post-launch, when you have customer service, right? When you have reports and you talk with customer center folks, and they have all these things that users are saying, you can now categorize it to CUJs. You can say that we are getting a lot of feedback for CUJ 5, right? There's a lot of problems there. Why don't we prioritize that? If we work on fix-its instead of working on this other CUJ that is doing fine, we can do that. So you see, along the entire life cycle, you're now ingesting this user knowledge, user data, to inform decisions based on what users are experienced instead of just based on your intuition.
Thanks, and I love the fact that you also mentioned a number of inputs that you use to measure the success. Is there like a single indicator, like an like the NPS is the ultimate customer loyalty indicator that companies use? Do you have like a magic indicator at Google where you say this is like a single number or ratio that says this CUJ in general is good or bad, and then obviously you would have like more detailed numbers behind that?
No. Because life is not simple. Life is complex, and that means every simple solution to a complex problem is garbage, right? And that's why NPS is garbage. and so there is no such.
I was waiting if you're an NPS advocate or you hate it.
There is no NPS advocates in the world.
They're hiding. They're in hiding.
Yeah, exactly. No, it is important to understand that the CUJs are very tailored to the product, right? And every product is different. Like even here, like in this audience, there might be people who work on very simple consumer apps that have just a few screens, and there might be people who work on cloud on the most complex products out there. And you can use CUJ for all those, right? And so by definition, you will not have a single metric that tells you things are doing well. You need to understand the users, the problems, the tasks, and then you need to define for your particular case, what does good look like? What does better look like or worse? So I can't give you a magic wand here. I'm sorry.
Okay, no, that's a fair and honest point. I appreciate that. I have like tons of questions already in the chat. So because I wanted to ask you about anyhow about measuring and what exactly do you measure in CUJs. I'm also gonna just throw the question from Alberto up here. What do you measure in a CUJ?
Yeah. So if you think about it, so a CUJ consists of goals and tasks. Okay, so you need to measure both. Just as a very simple way of thinking about it, you need to have measures for the goals. Are the goals achieved? And the tasks, are the tasks doable, usable, right? For the goals, the only reasonable way you can measure if users are happy with the goals is by asking them. So it's satisfaction type of surveys. But with the difference to the normal regular satisfaction surveys, typically you would ask somebody, how satisfied are you with airtime, right? So that's a generic satisfaction scale where you cannot understand how the CUJs are doing. So now you're moving this to the CUJ level, right? So you ask something like, how satisfied are you today with, and then you describe the CUJ, right? So if you would be in a music streaming app with listening to music without interruption. So now you get satisfaction numbers for that particular CUJ, which describes like the goals that people are trying to use. On the task level, there's like two main ways that you can approach that. The more sophisticated and the more simple. So if you're starting with CUJs, then it's likely that you will not be at a place where you can actually use the logs to understand how CUJs are doing. And so you might want to do some kind of benchmark studies where you have people doing the CUJs in the lab or a remote setup or something. You observe, and then you rate like how good those CUJs are regarding task success, right? Are people able to do these different tasks that they need to do to achieve the goal? Are they typically choosing the shortest and best path, or are they taking detours, or are they failing? But the more sophisticated way is that you actually use the real behavioral data that you have, which nowadays you have that, right? Users leave traces when they use your products. They leave all those signals, which you can measure and you can aggregate. So you can say, okay, this is the beginning of the CUJ, and this is the end. This is when we know they have achieved it. Now we measure everything that happens in between, all the paths, like which paths are they taking? Are they exiting prematurely, right? Are they abandoning or like failing? Are they restarting? Or are they achieving the goal, and are they achieving the goal in the optimal path, or are they taking different paths that we have not foreseen? And when you do that, you get like these task flows, right? Where you see like, okay, how many people are successful, which would be the classical conversion rate, right? That you use will like start and end successfully, but like also understanding which path are they taking, not only the exit, what exits and which detours are they taking. And when you have that, you're actually measuring the behavior of users with your product. And so you're measuring task success or task health, right? And those two things, like the satisfaction with the CUJ and the task health, give you a really good picture on how your CUJs are doing, and you can start using that in the product development lifecycle.
Javier, correct me if my impression is wrong here, but what you described, it felt to me quite close to how one goes about optimizing the conversion flow for a landing page where or a website like a SaaS service, where you understand what are the paths that people take on your platform to, like in this case, your aim is that they sign up and create an account. Am I going in the wrong direction with this analogy?
No, well, you're not going the wrong direction, but it is a little different, right? The conversion usually defines the conversion as the goal, and the conversion goal is mostly our goal. It's the company's goal. I want people to subscribe, right? But in a CUJ, you're explicitly talking about user goals, right? So it could be that this is one of the user goals, but also not. So that's one important difference. And the other is yes, some companies do sophisticated conversion analysis where they actually look at the past and stuff, but most conversion optimization data I have seen is mostly about just looking at the conversion and then trying blindly to move that up by changing random stuff. And so that is obviously not what the CUJ work would be doing. But in general, yes. I mean, obviously, a CUJ, if you think about it that way, has a start and an end point, and you're looking at the path in between, the behavioral path, and you're trying to make sure that it creates like a good experience.
All right, thanks. Thanks for the clarification. And I'm looking at the clock. Let's shift to putting some questions from the audience on your screen and our screen. I'm going to be they're not clustered or grouped in a way, so you're going to get bullets from all different directions, and we see how you can dodge them.
I'm disappointed that you were not able to cluster them while we were talking. It's like
I was actually thinking that I need some sort of a tool that can do that clustering for me live,
or a person,
or that too. Thank you for pointing that out. Let's start with a question of Daphna, which is about like if you're a designer working for a specific area of the product, but let's say the CUJ goes across to other product areas. How do you deal with that?
That is exactly the point. Like that is the strength of the. That is what CUJ is trying to achieve, right? You stop thinking in product silos, and you think about the user perspective, right? And so it's true, like if you have an area where designers are assigned to products, which is mostly the case, right? You need to figure out how do I ensure that we look at an entire CUJ. So there's different ways to solve that, right? You can say, okay, we create a task force of people that are in charge for CUJ1, which consists of key people that are in charge for the most important components of that CUJ. Right? So now you might have a designer working on the search experience and a designer working on the start page of your product, and others in that task force, like looking at that CUJ together because it's an important journey. So it's basically almost like a matrix layer, which I know is not always working great. So there's different ways you can try to achieve that. But if you think about it, it's the only way you're going to create a good user experience is by looking at that journey and by stopping to think in silos, which is the problem why you ship your org chart, or why we ended up in this situation with Google, how the CUJ effort started, right? Because nobody was in charge to look at that entire thing. Everybody was charged for their little piece. So it's not a problem. It's actually a positive outcome, but it requires additional work and organizational thinking.
Absolutely. I have a question from Anya about your biggest challenges back in the days as you transitioned towards CUJs in the organization. I think that's sort of related to the previous question, if CUJ is not something that is naturally already in the company.
Yes, so that is a good question, and I think I could possibly fill hours here talking about this. And so Anya is clearly an experienced UXer and knows that these kind of changes face resistance and so on. So, and I would be lying if I were telling you that at Google everything is working well, like everybody is using CUJs throughout the lifecycle and stuff, because we're not there, and it's going to be a long path. So there's different resistances, but I would call like the most important one is change aversion, and basically teams being reluctant to change the way they develop products, right? That is, we have always done it that way and it works. And now UX comes, right? In the worst case, UX comes, right? And tells us we need to do this, and it's more work, and we have all our OKRs and all our KPIs to achieve and so on. So I think at Google, a really important piece of the puzzle was that our CEO wanted that, right? Our CEO supported that. That helped a lot at that time. So getting senior leadership support for that, and basically saying we need to change the way we develop product, not drastically, but we need to improve it, right? And this needs to happen is important. Grassroots bottom up is difficult. Not saying it's not possible, but it's difficult. And then I think it's important as a UXer to regard this as a change management process. Like, you will not achieve everything at once. Like, change needs to be managed, and typically the well-managed change is change where you bring people along and you introduce small changes along that way for an end goal that you have, but not everything at once, right? So that's why I said, well, defining all the CUJs is fine. Measuring all of them at once will be an overkill. So maybe you pick one, or you pick two, right? And then changing everything in the product development cycle might be too much. Maybe you go like, okay, let's have CUJs in the PRD, and let's use CUJs to triage bug reports, right? And you first do that. Like, you think about which of those are low-hanging fruits that it's not so much work to do, but we will see results, which can then create a situation where stakeholders are positive towards CUJs because they realize it was good. So now you move to the more difficult areas to implement them. So yeah, piece by piece, introduce that change.
Yeah, and let's double click on the bringing people along aspect. I have a question from Saba, who's asking about how do you explain the importance and the value of CUJs to non-UX stakeholders?
Me too. No, again, so it is a difficult process, right? Because we are so much into user thinking, right? That for us, it's completely clear. It's like, yes, you should do that because then we think about our users. When the other disciplines have obviously other things in mind. So PM, rightly so, things about the product and the strategy and how we make money, right? And engineering things about like feasibility and uptime and code efficiency and so on, right? So in general, it is about switching languages to what your other counterparts care about, right? And so if you think about CUJs and trying to implement them, can you find angles where a PM sees more easily why this would be helpful to their success, right? We spend a lot of time talking about users because we're UXers, right? In that way, we sometimes talk like not the language that our counterparts are talking because they have another focus. So obviously we want the best for users, but can we package it in a way where we call out the advantages for product that will lead to these advantages for users? And when you move it to that level and you talk about a few things that they can benefit from through that program, it will be easier to get a foot in the door.
Is it, if a company is using OKRs, would you say that's also a fair starting point to see what the OKRs are of your counterparts, and just trying to also understand how what you're doing with CUJs has a positive impact on them?
I wish I could say yes, but I think the OKRs, if you look at that, I mean, obviously if you can find an angle where the CUJs will help with the OKRs, that's great. Especially when you figure out like if they can help measure some of the OKRs, right? If you can say like, okay, if we attach those metrics to the OKR, suddenly we can measure the success. That can be, but my experience is more like when you call out how it will make the PMs more successful, right? By focusing on users, for instance, I don't know, reducing customer support, right? So like we can be more efficient, or if we do this, then we can be faster in developing and shipping because we don't make mistakes, right? Taking their perspective can help to get some buy-in for that. But yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be lying if I think this is a difficult thing. If you have resistance, it is a long path. And that's why I said like having support from senior executives is super important, because then suddenly it matters to everyone. If you're a CEO or somebody really high goes like, I want us to measure CUJs, and in the next quarterly results, I want to see CUJ metrics. Suddenly it becomes important.
Absolutely. Jisun is asking about a different angle of CUJs, which is related to pace. Can engineering teams keep up the pace using CUJs? Does it have any impact on the velocity?
Well, I've personally, and I think likely most people in this call will believe that if you prevent mistakes, you will be faster, not slower. Right. And so if a lot of fast-paced environment, if you're actually honest and look at all the hoops, all the loops and everything that you did to actually achieve, you're like, well, maybe we're not that fast. We just made a lot of mistakes and had to fix it all the time, all over again. Right. So I have rarely seen that UX work really slows down things. I think it speeds it up, but it's sometimes hard to prove. Right. So as I said before, if you go small, define few, like one CUJ if you want, like the most important one or the one that is maybe easiest to measure, right? And then you start trying to use it to show how it has an impact on product development in a positive way by creating better products and faster. That can be of help. But I know those stakeholders, and I know the ones who go like, yes, it needs to be like fast, and UX is slowing us down and all that stuff, right? So it is an uphill battle that takes some time to for teams to realize, oh, this is actually making us better, not worse.
Thanks for that. A number of people in the audience asked about how CUJs relate to jobs to be done. So I'd love to have your take on this.
So we had that conversation at Google too. I think, to be completely honest, CUJs is a little older than jobs to be done, and was created in a time where jobs to be done was not popular or not out there, or maybe it was out there but nobody knew it. And if you compare both, they're very similar. We have even like a Google paper that explains the similarities and the differences. And I can't tell you by heart the differences. There are a few differences, but I'm not an expert in jobs to be done because I've always worked with CUJs. So I would have to go back to that and look at it. So Vicky, if you want to follow up with me, I'm happy to answer that through LinkedIn.
Thank you.
But they're similar. They're similar, right? I'm just saying, like, if you have jobs to be done already, then figure out how to measure them and use that, right? This is not the place where you go like, oh, we need a new framework, and then everybody goes like, oh, UX is trying to do a new shit. And no, like, it is, both have very similar goals. If you are using jobs to be done, that's great. The only thing you need to add is to actually measure them, and then you're on a really good path.
Absolutely. I have a question from Nancy about two-sided platforms, and how do you deal with CUJs in this context?
We have that in Google Play. So we have in Google Play consumers, that's all of you. When you have an Android phone, you want to install an app, and we have developers who use our developer tools to put their apps on the store. We have completely different set of CUJs for those two user groups. Like, it's because they're doing different things, right? So if you work in a marketplace or in an ecosystem, think about YouTube, right? You have viewers, creators, and advertisers. They have all different CUJs. They're completely separate to each other. I mean, obviously, some of them might, one CUJ moves to the other if you really think about it, like one impacts the experience of the other. But they're separate, and you can define them and measure them separately because it's really distinct user groups or distinct products.
Thanks, Javier. And with that, we're going to be concluding our session. I know there are a bunch of questions still unanswered in the comments, and I ask for your forgiveness. I try to do my best, and Javier, you are truly a rock star. You were point on answering all these questions, and I also timed it. You were quick. So thanks a lot for covering that. Please do get in touch with Javier or myself on
Yes.
LinkedIn. That's probably the best way to connect and continue the chat.
I answer all LinkedIn messages. So write me your question, you'll get an answer. The worst you will get is I have no idea. That happens.
Yeah. But that's I think honesty is a rare currency. So even if that happens, you get a very honest and upfront answer. Javier, we learned a lot from you today. I'm eternally grateful for the wisdom that you shared, the stories you took us back to the. I wouldn't say the golden age. Probably it's still golden age at Google.
No, it's the golden age.
It's the golden age. All right. Big thanks goes to the audience. You were fantastic today. So many amazing and insightful questions. And with that, Javier and everyone in the audience, I wish all of you a very nice rest of the day and take care.
Same to you. Thanks for having me. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Ciao, ciao.